Right, now we all remember that ruling regarding Audrey Mbugwa's case and her certificate. Now it may be a little bit of a victory for now, but not so fast, because the Kenya Christian Professionals Forum are coming out to challenge that ruling that was made by Justice Weldon Korir. Just showing you, John, how emotive this topic is. It didn't even take a week.
It didn't take a week, and even tonight, even before the bulletin, beg your pardon, I mean, we've been getting so much feedback on the subject. We'll get to that a little later, but we do have someone from the Kenya Christian Professionals Forum, and I'm about to get to in this discussion, so we'll see you a little later.
All right, okay.
All right, like I said, we've got quite a number of people that I was about to call it a bench, sorry Jeff. The couch is chock full tonight, and to my immediate right, we've got Audrey Mbugwa. Audrey needs very little introduction, but of course she can introduce herself just briefly. What do you like to be termed as professionally and of course personally?
I'm Audrey Mbugwa. I'm a programs manager with the Transgender Education and Advocacy. And thank you for having me here.
All right. And right next to her is a person from the group that is going to be challenging that ruling. Am I wrong, Charles? This is Charles Kanjama from the Kenya Professionals Forum. Charles, we'll get to your challenge in a moment, as well as some of the reasons why you disagree with that ruling. But next to Charles is Po Kimani. Po, you didn't get an opportunity to introduce yourself, so I'd like you to introduce yourself very briefly before we move forward.
All right.
Yep.
Like you said, my name's Po Kimani. I'm a gender non-conforming Kenyan, and I'm also a member of the Jinsi Yangu organization, which is an organization for intersex, transgender, and gender non-conforming Kenyans. And I'm a social justice activist overall.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. You know, I defined what gender nonconformity is, but I'll get to your own personal definition of what that is. And of course, to the extreme right is Dr. Bernard Mongesa from the KHRC. Thank you very much for joining us, everybody, every one of you. It's a difficult discussion, but we intend to try and see whether we'll be able to get some go forward. Before we do start, we've got a slide that I'd just like to show, as that formed part of Justice Weldon Korir's ruling this week. Paris, if you can just show us that slide on Justice Korir's ruling. As that comes up, I'll ask my first question, then we'll refer to it. Of course, the first question to you, Audrey. Why was this so important to you? Why did you need to go to court to challenge this?
It was important because I had exhausted any avenue for having my request addressed. I had requested NEC to change the name and to remove the gender mark. And they had said they could do it if I met certain conditions, and then later on they backtracked, and then they said they will not do it.
Speaking of backtracking, I think that's a code word we're talking about. As for candidates who are undergoing or have undergone sex changes, the council, of course, KNEC, can consider changes of certificates if the affected individual presents recent medical reports from qualified medical practitioners as evidence of their sex changes. That, of course, came from the KNEC, and that formed part of your evidence. Charles, why do you think that this ruling was flawed? Or first of all, do you think that this ruling was flawed?
We are studying the ruling. We've not concluded yet on whether we will challenge the ruling or not. We believe that the case involved two aspects. One was a personal aspect involving Audrey as an individual, and the second is the social implications of the ruling. We have a big concern, John Allen, if I may say so as a lawyer, which is that matters involving cultural change, we feel, require the greatest extent of public participation. And we think that our new constitution has provided mechanisms and structures for that public participation when changing laws through parliament. You even have parliamentary committees that can invite people and interview them and see what are the implications. We've seen that in a few Western countries that have decided to introduce a third gender, there has been widespread public participation. Incidentally, there are not many that have done so. So our concern, not just with this ruling, but generally with a number of rulings that have been coming out from our courts, is that the judges who are not well placed to engineer social change have been playing more and more of an activist role. So we are beginning by just expressing our concern, and we want especially lawyers who are concerned about what is happening to come out and insist on the need for public participation, because a change of this nature has so many implications.
It has
and
many
effects on
implications,
society.
but Weldon Correa was very, very well pronounced on the issue. He said that this was strictly about whether her gender marking should be removed or should be retained in that. But do you think, though, that this has opened up a door, a back door, so to speak?
I will not call it a Pandora's box, because he tried to limit his decision to the question of Kenya National Examination Council. But what you will find is that the reasoning that has been used in his judgment could be used, for example, by someone who joins a public school and says, look, I am neither male nor female. I don't want to go to the male bathrooms or the female bathrooms. I don't want to wear the uniform being worn by the male or the female. There are so many issues that are related,
and that's one
to
of the
this
issues
thing.
that we want to get into. Paul, the person right next to you, perhaps you can speak on the matter. Gender non-conformity. It is a person whose gender identity does not conform to social expectations, sort of what Charles was talking about, a Form 1 going in and saying, I'm neither male nor female. Explain it from your point of view. You are gender non-conformist, right?
Yeah. And to explain this, I would need to go back to the question of gender again, and what has been our understanding of gender. That for me would require that we also understand what sex means, because a lot of the times to understand gender, we come up with this term sex. And sex for me in simple terms is the physicality of it. So be it your sexual organs, and thus penis for a boy and a vagina for a woman, while gender in itself is the innate feeling, and it translates to your expression, your characteristics, and then roles. And as we have learned throughout the feminist revolution, is that gender is a social construct as much as it involves biology.
But it also involves specific roles that are assigned by biology, but also spill over into nurture.
My understanding of gender is that actually it's socially constructed. Yes, you have an anatomy that you choose to live with, or that you're given because of its description from social construct, but gender in itself is a role, is a characteristics, and in which case gender identity then is an internal feeling of oneself, which ultimately lies on the individual, in which case I smiled when the lawyer mentioned about the bathroom question, because for me it's important that then we ask the question, are we afraid of something that we do not understand, or afraid of things that have been constructed for us, but our realities are giving us different alternatives?
But perhaps, Paul, we're not taking into account in your argument that there are also social norms that we as a society must abide by, and therefore not everything should be left to the individual to decide, especially as regards something that can be as socially discomforting as gender roles and gender non-conformity. But we'll get back to that discussion in a moment. I just want to bring you in, Daktari.
Yes.
Daktari, about the ruling, let's get back to that. About the ruling, what do you think this meant from a human rights perspective?
What I can say, John, is that the ruling demonstrates that we are a nation that respects the rule of law. When you read the judgment delivered by Justice Correa, you see in it a reflection of various articles in the Constitution. For example, in Article 10, it talks about the principles of non-discrimination, for example. Then obviously, when you go down to the ruling again in Article 28, it talks about the inherent dignity of a human being. So for us, as a national human rights institution, those principles, human rights principles, are very key in the protection of human rights in the country.
Of course, but Charles, is this law being read selectively?
It is being read selectively. Article 27, when it talks about non-discrimination, uses the category sex. And we understand sex as being that gender, more than gender, that identity you have as male or female. What I can say is that there has been a growing confusion in the modern world, and I trace that to various problems involving sexual liberty that have begun to percolate in various aspects of our sexuality. And one of those areas with a crisis that is beginning to grow is the question of sexual or gender identity. And I think another area where we are finding this same issue is in the area of same-sex relations. And I think as a society we need to sit back and to think what is right for us as a society. The problem with the Western model of human rights agitation is that everyone as an individual goes to the court and says, look, I'm entitled to these rights against the rest of society, against everyone else.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is we need to push more the African, the communitarian approach, whereby we negotiate, we agree. What are these social norms? How will we behave in society? So long as it reflects nature.
And reflects what happens in our society. But let's just go to our next slide, and it's yet again from the ruling that was made as regards Audrey. The next slide, as it comes up, I'll just read. For completeness, I should mention in passing that a transsexual is to be distinguished from a homosexual. A homosexual is a person who is attracted sexually to persons of the same sex. So that there is there's a bit of a divergence in terms of definitions, especially with regards transgender individuals and people who are homosexuals, lesbians, gays, and bisexuals. Let me just go to you, Audrey. Is this true? Thinking about what happened in your life and what your experience was, when did you first start to feel like you were, as you define it now, transgender?
It dates back to when I was a child. But now I started making efforts to undergo the gender transition at the age of 19.
Yeah.
But in the process of my transition, there was that confusion of, because I didn't have access to materials on transsexualism, on the difference between gay and homosexual and transsexual.
Do you think there is a distinction?
Of course, as in it's like day and night, you know. And we normally like to emphasize the difference because it has a serious impact in the lives of transsexual people. We don't want transsexual people being targeted for homophobic attacks by members of the society. And I'm not saying that homosexuals deserve to be attacked. What I'm saying is we should not make transsexuals targets of attack by the community. We are different species. Transsexuals are heterosexual. Transsexual has to do with you undergoing gender transition because there's a conflict between yourself and your body.
All right.
It has nothing to do with who you date. It has nothing to do with who you sleep with. And we wish the human rights sector, especially the gay community, would try or would make effort to create that that distinction,
but
rather than swallowing the transsexual.
Is there a distinction really? If we look at it from a biological perspective,
yeah.
Audrey, you are in the process of going through a complete change from man to woman, and at one point that should involve a sex change, so to speak, right?
Continue.
But at the chromosomal level, you'll still read XY if there's a test done. That would mean that biologically speaking, you still are a man. Don't you think that would be perceived to be still a man having a relationship? For instance, if you so chose to do so, having another relationship with another man, and thus being a homosexual relationship?
First of all, point number one, when you are born in a hospital, when they are assigning your sex, they do not look at your chromosomes. They look at your genitalia. When you change sex, why is it now we are looking at chromosomes and not genitalia? And then another thing I need to raise awareness of is we need to stop sexually objectifying transgender people. If you look at a transgender person, you should not start questioning how do they perform sexual activity. Let us refrain from viewing transsexuals as tools of sexual fantasies and certain activities. A transsexual is a human being. A transsexual is not a sex object. Yeah, so let us stop now overanalyzing the issue, moving away from important issues of human dignity and access to healthcare and justice, and now focusing on side shows such as
sex.
How does a transsexual have sex? I mean, that is an irrelevant issue. It's a non-issue.
Irrelevant to you, but perhaps it sex rules quite a bit of what we do, Audrey, and that's something that we can't wish away. Paul, when you first discovered that you were gender nonconformist, did it have anything to do with your sexuality?
Not really, but I cannot disconnect my journey, my personal journey, from everything that happens. I think all the parts of my life are inherent to who I am and what I have become right now. But it's also very important what Audrey is saying, that there's a huge distinction between sexual orientation and gender identity. And yes, every human being has both a sexual orientation and a gender identity. But the beauty of it is that then those things are inherent to each and every individual and do not affect or impact the person outside of it.
All right, let
me
ask you an uncomfortable question. You can or can't answer just based on that question.
Yeah.
What is your sexual orientation, and how does that parry with your gender identity?
My sexual orientation is queer, if I have to answer in public, and I identify as queer because I have gone through a personal and political journey to realize that my understanding of gender in itself is based on a misconstrued idea. Because as a person who has had to go through all the scientific tests, hormonal tests, chromosomal tests, and up to a point physical tests, I know very deeply why it is important that we understand that gender is completely a very personal process, and that it's influenced by society, but that shouldn't be the determinant factor. And that the fact that we only view it in terms of maleness and femaleness, we take away the experiences of people who are born intersex, and for the rest of us who are gender non-conforming, because then we are forced to choose a category, and then we have to live our lives in ways that probably erase the realities. If I had to speak my story, it would be very different from Audrey's, and it will be very different from other intersex and transgender people. And that's the kind of information we need, I think, to be giving now to Kenyans, what it means that we are very diverse, and even when we speak about gender identity, that continuum also includes a lot of identities that also mean very different to the individuals who experience it.
Charles, do you agree?
No, I do not agree. In fact, I'm very concerned about the attempt to normalize what I consider to be certain human disorders. Incidentally, I'm trying to speak sensitively, and I'll say this: no one is perfect. No one has 100% health, physical or even psychological health. There are people who suffer from depression. There are people who suffer from obsessive compulsive disorder and so on. When a depressive goes to a psychiatrist and he says, I want to commit suicide, I'm having suicidal feelings, the psychiatrist is not meant to tell him, okay, because we found it impossible to get you to stop having these suicidal feelings, go and knock yourself off. This is what sometimes they do in the Netherlands with euthanasia. But this is a topsy-turvy approach to viewing medical problems. What you need to do is to identify the problem and to solve the problem. So different individuals have different problems. Right now
but for instance, like Audrey was identified as having a gender identity disorder.
Let me explain.
What the implication of that? Perhaps she should explain, because there's an implication that affected her specifically. Then we'll come back to you.
But there's a big body of medical literature, and there are two approaches that psychiatrists have used. There's one group of psychiatrists, I've had this debate with Audrey. There's one group of psychiatrists who say, look, if this gender dysmorphism or this gender dysphoria, this feeling that I'm in the wrong body is so strong and persistent, then change the body to conform with the feelings. And there's another group of psychiatrists who say, no, this is not the right approach. In fact, they are saying that we have sold them short. We've sold this self-identifying transgender people short. They should change their feelings to conform to their actual gender.
Is that possible, Audrey?
I don't think so. And what I would say is, I don't want to get into an argument of whether there's what's the right treatment. But what I would say is we should focus on the well-being of the patient with a gender identity disorder.
Yeah, but there are two options that have been offered. Let me put it to you quite bluntly.
Yeah.
If you had the opportunity to change your own feelings to conform with what your body read to society, would you have
Back
done
then,
so? Yes.
Yeah, I would have taken the cure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Then
if there
what
was
changed?
a cure, but there's no cure for gender identity disorder. We only have treatment to manage the condition, the disorder, but we don't have a cure to take it from the way you have a cure for pneumonia. We only manage gender identity disorder, but we don't treat it. We don't have a cure. Okay. But if we had a cure, trust me, I would have taken that cure.
All right. Bernard.
Yes.
From a human rights perspective, again,
right.
Are we leaving ourselves with too much room to identify with the individual rights of people like Paul, with the individual rights of transgenders like Audrey, and not being conformist to the wider societal views on transgender, on intersex, on gender nonconformity?
Now, my response to that question would be that, it depends on how people look at human rights. How does the Western world look at human rights? How is Africa conceptualizing human rights? Mm-hmm. For me, it is the question of choice. Yeah? And if the individuals have made that choice, then they will live with that choice. And we have to respect that choice that they have made.
But to be frank, there are choices that have implications on other people. For instance, this choice, a lot of people would argue, has implications on what the family unit would look like. Mm-hmm. I'll start with you, Paul. Do you think that this choice, for instance, a choice to be gender nonconformist, has an impact on what the social construct of a family is?
Not in any way. Because also I am an African and I know that how families are envisioned, how I have embodied family.
Yeah, but a general African definition of a family is man, woman, and children. Mm-hmm. As a person who, to use your term, is queer, that would have an implication on how you define family. So how does that parry with what the definition is societally?
I don't see the problem or the difference in that, because personally I know that those are individual choices and each choice has its own consequence and you have to live with that, which is why for me I'm very comfortable, and I know that it's also a question of privilege and exposure that I am able to sit here and speak for myself. Mm-hmm. I would like to have this conversation in regards to what we are talking about, human life, human dignity. And that's really the essence of this conversation. I think the essence of Audrey going and asking for her right to have her life the way she chooses to.
Yeah.
So I go back to that question. Is my family comfortable with me living the way I do? I know a lot of people will have a lot of different answers also.
Like Charles, for instance.
Yeah.
Let's get Charles in on this.
I think, John Allen, I want to begin by saying that I teach both legal philosophy, jurisprudence, and criminology. Our whole criminal justice system is built around the idea of conventions of the common good, of certain things that you will not allow, certain things you will prohibit, certain things you will allow. So there is a balance between individual liberty and the common good. And there are times when individual choices affect the common good. And what I would like to say is that we need to be aware, especially when you look at some of the Western countries that have taken this question of gender identity, different gender identities, to their last consequences. They have substantial implications on society. Is our society ready for that? Is our society a stakeholder? Even when these cases are being heard in the courts, are there people representing the people of Kenya?
In fact, that's where I'd like us to wind up our thoughts with you. Is society ready to accept a third gender?
Let me talk about the ruling that was made. When we filed this case, the Kenya Christian lawyers forum, they applied to be enjoined in the case. And they were told it's okay, go ahead, serve them with your papers. We waited for 2 months. They never served us anything. In the beginning of November, they wrote to the court, said, we are withdrawing and we don't want to be involved. Mm-hmm. We did hundreds and hundreds of interviews to let the public know what was going on. The case was not an issue of that gender.
Yeah.
We only requested orders to have NEC change the name in the certificate
but
and remove.
But you understand why society would look at it as an inroad towards a discussion about third gender, right?
Yeah, and I understand the concerns that you have about the family. Mm-hmm. But we have laws that say that the basic unit of the society is a family. All whereby we have a man and a woman. We are not challenging that. Okay. And we do not intend to challenge that.
All right. Final thoughts on whether you are ready for there to be an acceptance, legally and otherwise, of a third gender.
Yeah, sure. I think this is something that can happen in Kenya, but we need a lot of consultations. We need a lot of sensitization about terms such as what's the difference between transgender and intersex? Who would fall into that gender? What's the process? Okay. But it has to be done in a way. We need to have vigorous debates about the issue.
Vigorous discussion.
It should be done because we want that. We should not just import it from other countries. We should respect our culture and look at what will work for us.
Okay, Charles, in 30 seconds. I'm sorry to rush you, but don't have much time. What is your take? Are we ready?
My take is that it should not be a question of personal feelings or even what society is ready for or not. What we need to do is to study our human nature and to study the reality of the human condition. Even when we talk about gender, I don't believe gender is just a question of anatomy or chromosomes. It is even at the psychological and the spiritual level.
Yeah.
What we need to do is to ask ourselves what is right for us as a human society, as human individuals, to help us to accomplish our good. And I believe that the entire searching for a third gender or the confusion about sexuality is a manifestation of a deep disorder in society that we need to address.
That. Yes. Thank you very much, Charles. Poe, what do you think? 30 seconds. I'll have to rush you.
All right. I think that there is a problem when we stereotype and believe in one story narrations. There is importance as Kenyans, as human beings, that we constantly allow ourselves to question what it means to be human and to have that dignity by just the nature of being born. So for me, it's to question and to ask every Kenyan to be that Kenyan who interrogates what's their role in making sure that we respect and we protect the dignity of all human beings.
All right. How about you, Daktari?
What I can say is that we need to ask ourselves whether society will be ready or not on the basis of, for instance, are there any gaps within our legislation? Are our people, for instance, aware of the issues that we are talking about? Mm-hmm. Because then from that angle, they can be able to make an informed, opinion about the issues that are under discussion.
All right.
And maybe my last point on the ruling, John, is that I want to say that it has demonstrated the issues around access to justice and equality before the law.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us.